My son, Hollis, thought he had committed the perfect crime. He thought he could walk into my farmhouse, shed a few fake tears about a gambling debt, and trick me into signing away a 600-acre legacy. Hollis is screaming, red-faced, pointing a finger at Verna. You ruined me. You threw away $5 million. Hollis crying at the table, looking pathetic. He told me he was going to die if I didn't sell. He told me the buyer was a savior. He thought I was just a frail, 72-year-old widow who didn't know how to read the fine print. But Hollis forgot one thing. I didn't survive 40 Montana winters by being soft, and I certainly didn't survive them by being stupid. The buyer, Mercer, looking shocked at the document. This isn't the Omnivest deed. You switched them. Verna sitting on the porch, holding a teacup, looking satisfied as a car drives away. He wanted my signature. He got it. But he didn't bother to check what I was signing until it was too late. This is the story of how my ungrateful son tried to sell my life, and how I made sure he paid the price. The wind cut through the Bitterroot Valley like a freshly sharpened knife, carrying enough frost to freeze the breath in your lungs before you could even exhale. Verna tightened her scarf, her leather gloves gripping the icy wire of the fence line. At 72, most women were in Florida, playing bridge, or sitting in heated sunrooms, knitting blankets for grandchildren they rarely saw. But Verna wasn't most women, and Thistle Creek Ranch wasn't just a piece of property. It was 600 acres of blood, sweat, and memories that stretched back 4 generations. It was the place where she had buried her husband, Hank, 10 years ago, right under the old oak tree on the ridge. It was the vault that held every secret, every hardship, and every victory her family had ever known. She tested the tension of the barbed wire with a sharp tug. It held firm. "Good girl," she whispered to the fence, treating the ranch like a living thing. She looked out over the white expanse of the valley. The developers had been circling for years, like vultures waiting for a wounded animal to finally stumble. They wanted to turn her pastures into luxury ski lodges and her barn into a themed restaurant for tourists who had never touched a horse in their lives. They offered millions, sending letters on thick, creamy paper that smelled like money. Verna burned every single one of them in the wood stove without even opening the envelopes. This land wasn't for sale. It was the only thing that made sense in a world that was changing too fast. But the silence of the morning was shattered by the roar of an engine. It wasn't the familiar chug of a tractor or the rumble of a neighbor's pickup truck. It was a high-pitched, aggressive whine. Verna shielded her eyes against the glare of the snow. A black luxury SUV, low to the ground and completely out of place on the gravel road, was fishtailing its way up her driveway. It moved with a reckless speed, kicking up rooster tails of slush and mud. Verna didn't move. She just stood there, her boots planted in the frozen earth, watching the intruder approach. She felt a prickle of unease at the base of her neck. Not fear, but the instinct of a mother wolf sensing a predator near the den. The car skidded to a halt in front of the farmhouse, the engine ticking as it cooled in the frigid air. The driver's door flew open, and a man stumbled out. He wasn't dressed for Montana. He wore a suit that probably cost more than Verna's truck, but it was wrinkled and stained. He had no coat, just a thin silk scarf flapping uselessly in the wind. Verna squinted. The man looked familiar, but broken. It took her a moment to reconcile the image of this wreck with the memory of the polished, arrogant man who had left home 20 years ago. "Hollis?" she said, the name tasting like dust in her mouth. Her son didn't answer immediately. He looked around wildly, his eyes bloodshot and wide, scanning the horizon as if he expected an army to be cresting the hill behind him. When his gaze finally landed on Verna, he didn't smile. He crumbled. He ran toward her, slipping on a patch of ice, and nearly fell into her arms. He smelled of stale bourbon, expensive cologne, and terrified sweat. "Mom!" he choked out, his voice cracking. "Mom, you have to help me. They're coming. They're going to kill me." Verna didn't hug him back immediately. She stood rigid, letting him weep into her heavy wool coat. She had spent a lifetime protecting this boy, fixing his mistakes, paying off his reckless college debts, and bailing him out of trouble when his temper got the better of him. But this felt different. This wasn't just trouble. This was catastrophe. She pulled back, gripping his shoulders with hands that were strong from decades of farm work. "Get inside," she said firmly, "before you freeze to death." The kitchen was warm, smelling of wood smoke and the cinnamon tea Verna brewed every morning. Hollis sat at the heavy oak table, his hands shaking so violently that coffee sloshed over the rim of the mug Verna placed in front of him. He looked like a cornered animal. Verna sat opposite him, her back straight, her face unreadable. She waited. She knew that silence was the best way to get the truth out of a liar, and Hollis had been bending the truth since he was 6 years old. "I owe money, Mom," Hollis whispered, staring into the black coffee. "A lot of money." "Gambling?" Verna asked, her voice flat. She knew he had a weakness for high-stakes poker, a habit he had picked up during his time in investment banking. He liked the rush. He liked feeling smarter than everyone else in the room. Hollis nodded. A jerky, spasmodic movement. It started small, just trying to cover some losses in the market. But then, I tried to win it back. I went to a private group, in Vegas. They aren't banks, Mum. They don't send letters. They send people. He pulled his phone from his pocket and slid it across the table. The screen was cracked. A text message was open. It was a photo of Hollis walking into a coffee shop in Seattle 2 days ago. The caption underneath was simple and chilling. "Friday, noon, or we collect in blood." Verna felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. "How much, Hollis?" He looked up, tears streaming down his face. 2 million. The number hung in the air, sucking the oxygen out of the room. $2 million. It was an impossible sum. Verna had savings, but not that kind of money. Her wealth was in the land, in the livestock, in the equipment. She was land rich and cash poor, just like every other rancher in the valley. "I don't have it," Verna said quietly. "You know I don't have that kind of cash sitting in a cookie jar." "I know," Hollis said, leaning forward, his eyes suddenly intense. The despair seemed to shift, replaced by a desperate, frantic energy. "But you have the ranch. This place, the appraisal value is nearly 3 million now. The market is hot." Verna went still. The suggestion hung between them like a physical blow. Sell the ranch? Sell Thistle Creek? It was like asking her to sell a limb. "Hollis, this is our home. This is your father's legacy. We don't sell." "Mom, listen to me." Hollis slammed his hand on the table, the sudden aggression making the spoons rattle. "I don't have a choice. If I don't pay them by tomorrow, I am a dead man. Do you understand? They will kill me. Are you telling me you love this pile of dirt more than you love your own son?" It was a cruel question, designed to twist the knife in a mother's heart. Verna looked at him. She saw the fear, yes. But underneath it, she saw something else. A demand, an expectation. He had always believed the world owed him a living, and now he believed his mother owed him her life's work. But looking at his tear-streaked face, the mother in her overrode the rancher. She couldn't let him die. She couldn't be the one to bury her child. Who buys a 600-acre ranch in 24 hours, Hollis? She asked, her voice weary. Real estate deals take months. I found someone, Hollis said quickly, too quickly. A private investor. His name is Mercer. He's in town. He's been looking for a property exactly like this for a tax exchange. He has the cash ready, Mum. He can wire it today. We just need to sign the papers. The speed of it made Verna dizzy. It was too convenient, too neat. But the text message on the phone was real, and the terror in Hollis's eyes seemed genuine. She looked out the window at the snow-covered fields. She thought of Hank. Forgive me, she thought, but I have to save the boy. Call him, Verna said, the words feeling like ash on her tongue. Hollis didn't waste a second. He was on the phone instantly, his voice dropping to a murmur. Within an hour, another car was coming up the driveway. This one was even more imposing than Hollis's rental, a sleek, armoured sedan with tinted windows that looked like it belonged in a government motorcade. The man who stepped out didn't look like a rancher, and he didn't look like a family man looking for a quiet retreat. Mercer was tall, thin, and impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that looked sharp enough to cut skin. He didn't look at the mountains. He didn't look at the barn. He walked straight to the porch, checking his watch as if the fresh air was wasting his billable hours. Mrs. Verna? Mercer said as he entered the kitchen. He didn't offer to shake her hand. His voice was smooth, cultured, and utterly cold. Hollis tells me we have a time-sensitive situation. My son is in trouble, Verna said, standing by the sink. She kept her distance. She didn't like this man. He had eyes like a shark, flat, black, and dead. Indeed, Mercer said. He placed a leather briefcase on the table and snapped the latches open. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the quiet room. He pulled out a stack of documents, thick and bound with a heavy clip. I am prepared to offer $2.2 million for the entirety of Thistle Creek Ranch. The funds will be transferred to an escrow account to settle Hollis's obligations immediately upon signature. The remaining balance will go to you. And the land? Verna asked. What will you do with it? Mercer smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. It was a smile of condescension, the kind one gives to a child asking a silly question. I represent a holding company, Omnivest. We appreciate the aesthetic of the valley. We have no immediate plans to change the operations. Omnivest, Verna repeated. The name sounded sterile, corporate. Mum, we don't have time for a Q&A, Hollis snapped. He was pacing behind Mercer, chewing on his fingernails. Mercer has to leave in an hour to make the wire transfer deadline. If we miss it, the deal is off, and I'm... He trailed off, letting the threat hang in the air. Mercer uncapped a gold fountain pen and laid it on the document. The paper was titled Quitclaim Deed. It was a brutal instrument. A fast, dirty way to transfer property without title insurance or due diligence. It was the kind of document used in divorces or desperate situations. Sign right here, Mercer said, his tone dropping into a command. He pointed to the line at the bottom. Press hard. It makes it legal. Verna walked to the table. She looked at the paper. It was just a piece of wood pulp and ink, but it was the death warrant for her life. She looked at Hollis. He was staring at the pen with a hunger that disturbed her. He wasn't looking at her. He wasn't looking at the home he grew up in. He was looking at the transaction. Mum, Hollis hissed, his voice taking on a nasty edge. Pick up the pen. Don't be difficult. Not now. Don't be difficult. The phrase triggered a memory. It was something Hank used to say to the unbroken horses, but Hollis was saying it to his mother. He was treating her like an obstacle, not a savior. Verna reached out and took the pen. Her hand trembled, not from age, but from a sudden, violent surge of adrenaline. Something was wrong. Her gut, honed by 50 years of surviving blizzards and droughts, was screaming at her. Why was Mercer so calm? Why did the deed transfer ownership to a holding company instead of a person? And why did Hollis look like he was trying to suppress a smile? Hollis leaned in, invading her personal space. Do it. Save me. It was the entitlement that did it. The absolute certainty that he could waltz in, destroy her world, and demand she thank him for it. Verna looked at the signature line. Then she looked at the window. She gasped, a sharp, ragged intake of breath. She dropped the pen. It clattered onto the table, rolling across the document. "Mom!" Hollis barked. "What are you doing?" Verna grabbed the edge of the table, bowing her head, feigning a sudden dizziness. She made her hand shake visibly. I can't breathe," she whispered, playing the part of the frail old woman they assumed she was. "My chest, it's tight." "Oh, for God's sake!" Hollis groaned, throwing his hands up. "She's having a panic attack. Mum, pull it together. We have 10 minutes. I need my pills," Verna stammered, leaning heavily on the chair. "And I need to lie down, just for a moment. I can't sign when my hands are shaking like this. It won't be valid." Mercer looked at Hollis with pure irritation. "Hollis, manage her." "I'm trying," Hollis shouted. He grabbed Verna's arm, his grip too tight, hurting her. "Mum, sit down and sign the damn paper." Verna pulled her arm away, putting real steel into the movement. She looked Hollis dead in the eye, dropping the mask for just a fraction of a second. "I said I need a moment, Hollis. Unless you want me to have a stroke right here on the kitchen floor. Then nobody signs anything, and the probate courts tie this land up for 2 years. Is that what you want?" The threat of probate froze him. Hollis knew enough about law to know that if she died or became incapacitated before signing, the land would be locked in legal hell, and his creditors wouldn't wait. He backed off, running a hand through his hair. "Fine," he spat. "Fine. Go lie down. Take your pills. You have 1 hour, Mum. 1 hour. Or my blood is on your hands." Verna nodded weakly. She shuffled out of the kitchen, holding the banister as she climbed the stairs. She looked like a defeated, frightened old woman. But the moment she reached the landing and was out of their sight, her posture changed. She stood up straight. The shaking stopped. Her eyes were dry and hard as flint. She walked silently down the hall to her sewing room, not to get pills, but to get the burner phone she kept hidden in her knitting basket. Hollis thought he was managing a senile old lady. He had forgotten that Verna had been managing wolves since before he was born. She wasn't going to sign blindly. She was going to find out who the hell Mercer really was, and she was going to find out why her son was so eager to sell her out. Hollis thought he had cornered his mother, but he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. He had underestimated her. And now, the hunt was on. If you've ever had a family member try to guilt-trip you into giving up what's yours, you know exactly how Verna feels right now. Hollis is counting on her love to blind her to his greed. He thinks he's already won. But he doesn't know that Verna is just getting started. If you want to see this ungrateful son get exactly what he deserves, hit that subscribe button. Let's show Hollis that you don't mess with Grandma. The door to the sewing room clicked shut, the latch catching with a soft snick that sounded like a thunderclap in the silent house. Verna didn't turn on the light. The midday sun reflecting off the snow outside provided enough illumination, casting long, pale shadows across the dress forms and stacks of fabric that lined the walls. She moved to the old cedar chest in the corner, her knees protesting as she knelt on the hardwood floor. Buried beneath a pile of quilting squares was a small tin box, and inside it, a burner phone she had bought 3 years ago for emergency cattle auctions when the main line went down. She prayed the battery still held a charge. She pressed the power button. The screen flickered to life, glowing a sickly blue in the dim room. Verna's fingers, usually so sure when threading a needle or birthing a calf, felt thick and clumsy as she dialed. She didn't need to look up the number. She had memorized it years ago, hoping she would never have to use it. Hello? The voice on the other end was sharp, professional, and guarded. Elora, Verna said quietly but powerfully, keeping her voice low enough to avoid carrying through the floorboards. It's your Aunt Verna. There was a pause, heavy with a decade of family silence. Aunt Verna? Is everything okay? I haven't heard from you since Uncle Hank's funeral. I don't have time for pleasantries, Elora, Verna said, cutting through the awkwardness. I need your skills. I need you to look into a company called Omnivest Holdings and a man named Mercer. He's a lawyer, or claims to be. Omnivest? Elora's tone shifted instantly from estranged niece to forensic accountant. Why? What's going on? Hollis is here, Verna said, the name tasting bitter. He says he owes $2 million to a gambling ring. He says if I don't sell the ranch to this Mercer character today, he's a dead man. But Elora, something isn't right. The paperwork is too fast. The buyer is too eager. And Hollis, he's too ready to sell the ground his father is buried in. Give me 20 minutes, Elora said, her voice crisp. Keep your phone on. And Aunt Verna, be careful. If Hollis is desperate enough to involve loan sharks, he's desperate enough to do anything. Verna ended the call and sat back on her heels, listening to the house. Downstairs, she could hear the heavy thud of boots pacing back and forth in the kitchen. Hollis was like a caged tiger waiting for his prey to weaken. She stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the driveway. Mercer's black car was still there, idling, a dark stain on the pristine white landscape. They were waiting for her to brake. They thought she was up here trembling, terrified of losing her son. They didn't know she was arming herself. She waited. The minutes stretched like hours. To buy time, she opened the door and called down, pitching her voice to sound frail and wavering. Hollis? I'm feeling a bit better. Just give me a little longer to compose myself. Hurry up, Mom! Hollis yelled back, his tone sharp as a knife. Mercer is losing patience. Verna closed the door again. She walked to the mirror and looked at herself. The woman staring back wasn't the victim they wanted. She was the woman who had kept this ranch alive through the recession of '08, through the blight of Saltine, and through the grief of widowhood. She smoothed her grey hair. Let them wait. Finally, the phone buzzed against the cedar chest. Verna snatched it up. I found them, Elora said, breathless. Aunt Verna, you need to listen to me very carefully. Do not sign anything. Tell me, Verna commanded calmly. There is no gambling debt, Elora said. The words hit Verna like a physical blow. I ran a credit check and a deep dive into Hollis's financials. He has debts, yes, but they aren't from poker. He leveraged himself to the hilt on a tech startup that went bust last month. He owes investors, legitimate ones, about 300 grand. But no syndicate is coming to kill him. Verna closed her eyes, a wave of nausea rolling over her. He had lied. He had looked her in the face, wept tears of terror, and lied about his own death just to manipulate her. Then why the rush? Why the 2 million? Because of Mercer, Elora continued, her voice gaining speed. Mercer isn't a private investor. He's a fixer for the distinctive luxury group, Apex Resorts. I found a shell corporation link between Omnivest and Apex. They've been trying to buy up the valley for years to build a ski resort, but the zoning laws stopped them. They need your land, specifically your water rights, to make the project viable. And Hollis? Verna asked, dreading the answer. Here's the kicker, Elora said, her voice dropping to a whisper. I found a draft contract in a leaked email server from Mercer's firm. Don't ask how I got in. Hollis isn't just selling the farm to pay off his bad investments. He has a side deal. If he secures Thistle Creek for under 3 million, Apex pays him a consulting fee. How much? Verna whispered. $5 million, Elora said. Tax-free, routed through the Caymans. Aunt Verna, he's not selling the farm to save his life. He's selling it to fund his retirement. He's stealing your equity, putting you in a home, and walking away with $5 million while you get nothing but a bed in a facility. The phone slipped slightly in Verna's hand. The betrayal was so absolute, so complete, that it felt cold, like the winter wind outside. It wasn't just greed, it was an erasure. Hollis had looked at her life, her work, her legacy, and decided it was worth exactly enough to buy him a life of leisure on a beach somewhere. He didn't care if she died in a sterile room surrounded by strangers, as long as his check cleared. Thank you, Elora, Verna said, her voice devoid of emotion. You've done enough. What are you going to do? Elora asked urgently. Call the sheriff. Kick them out. No, Verna said quietly but powerfully. If I kick them out, Hollis just leaves and waits for me to die so he can inherit it later. I need to end this. Permanently. She hung up and powered off the phone, slipping it into her pocket. She stood there for a long moment, letting the grief wash over her. She mourned the little boy with the scraped knees who used to run to her for comfort. She mourned the teenager who learned to drive the tractor on this very land. She buried them both in her mind, right next to Hank. The man downstairs wasn't her son. He was a thief, and Verna didn't tolerate thieves. She opened the door and walked downstairs. The silence in the house had changed. It was no longer the silence of waiting. It was the silence of a trap snapping shut. When she entered the living room, she stopped. Hollis was there, but he wasn't pacing anymore. He was busy. He had pulled a cardboard box from the garage and was indiscriminately sweeping her belongings into it. The porcelain figurines on the mantel, the old clock, the framed photos of his own childhood. He was dumping them in with careless disregard. He looked up as she entered, holding a crystal vase that had belonged to Verna's mother. What are you doing? Verna asked calmly. Just getting a head start, Hollis said, his voice carrying a fake sweetness that made her skin crawl. You won't need all this clutter where you're going. The facility I found for you is very modern, minimalist. It's better to travel light. The facility, Verna repeated. You've already picked one out? Best in the state, Hollis lied effortlessly. Assisted living, nurses on call, bingo nights. You'll love it, Mum. You won't have to worry about the cold or the cows anymore. It's a vacation. He dropped the crystal vase into the box. It clinked against a picture frame, chipping the rim. Verna watched the chip form, a tiny jagged wound in the glass. He was erasing her. He was packing up her life like it was trash to be hauled away so he could collect his payout. Mercer was sitting at the dining table typing on his laptop. He didn't even look up. "We are running out of time, Verna. The wire deadline is in 45 minutes. If we don't sign now, the deal is dead." Hollis stepped toward her, looming. He used his height to intimidate, a tactic he must have learned in the corporate boardrooms. "Mum, the pen. Now." Verna looked at him. She looked deep into his eyes, searching for any trace of the son she loved. She saw only impatience and a greed so naked it was almost pitiable. He wasn't scared of a syndicate. He was scared of being poor. He was scared of having to work for a living like she did. "I'm ready," Verna said calmly. Hollis exhaled, a sound of massive relief. "Thank God. I knew you'd come to your senses. But," Verna added, raising a hand, "I need to do this properly. If I am leaving this house, I want one last cup of tea in my kitchen, with my son, before I sign my life away." "We don't have time for tea," Hollis snapped, his face reddening. "Make time," Verna said, her voice hardening just enough to warn him. "Or I don't sign." "It takes 5 minutes to boil water, Hollis. Humour an old woman." She walked past him into the kitchen, not waiting for an answer. She could feel his eyes boring into her back, filled with hatred. He hated her for making him wait. He hated her for having power over him. As she filled the kettle, her mind was racing. She knew where the real deeds were kept, in the safe in the pantry, hidden behind the jars of pickled beets. She also knew she had a folder of documents from the Land Conservation Trust she had been reviewing last year, documents she had never signed but kept as an option. They looked remarkably similar to a standard deed transfer. Same legal weight, same heavy bond paper. She set the kettle on the stove. The whistle would cover the sound of the safe opening. "Hollis," she called out, her voice trembling slightly, forcing the performance. "Can you come help me get the cookies from the top shelf? My shoulder is acting up." Hollis groaned audibly from the living room. "Unbelievable," he muttered to Mercer. "She's stalling." "Go," Mercer said in a cold voice. "Humour her. Get the signature. I don't care about the cookies." Hollis stomped into the kitchen. "Which shelf, Mum?" he asked, his tone dripping with condescension. "That one." She pointed to the highest cabinet, the one that required the step stool. While Hollis dragged the stool over and climbed up, his back to her, Verna moved. She didn't go to the cookie jar. She slipped into the pantry. The kettle began to sing, a low, rising whistle that masked the click of the safe dial. Left, right, left. The heavy door swung open. She grabbed the folder labelled Thistle Creek Trust and slid it under her apron. She pulled out the quitclaim deed Mercer had left on the counter earlier. He had been careless, leaving a copy there for her to review while she made tea. She swapped them. It was a sleight of hand she had never practiced, but desperation made her fingers nimble. She slid Mercer's deed into the stack of old newspapers by the recycling bin and placed the trust document on the tray, covering the header with a napkin and a plate of store-bought cookies. "I don't see any cookies, Mom," Hollis said, climbing down, annoyed. "Oh, silly me," Verna said, turning around, the tray in her hands. "I must have left them on the counter. Here they are." She walked past him, carrying the tray into the dining room. She placed it on the table, right next to Mercer's laptop. She set the tea down. And then, with a hand that didn't shake at all, she slid the document from under the napkin and placed it on top of Mercer's pile. "I'm sorry for the delay," Verna said to Mercer, sitting down opposite him. She folded her hands on the table. "I'm ready to sign now." Mercer looked at her, then at the document. He didn't check the header. Why would he? He was the predator. She was the prey. He assumed she was too stupid, too scared, and too old to pull a switch. He assumed he had won the moment he walked through the door. "Excellent," Mercer said, uncapping the gold pen once more. He spun the document around to face her. "Just the signature line, Verna, and then you can enjoy your tea." Verna picked up the pen. She looked at Hollis. He was smiling now, a shark baring its teeth. He was already spending the money in his head. He was already gone. "Goodbye, Hollis," she thought. She lowered the pen to the paper. "If you want to see Verna take Hollis down without lifting a finger, hit that like button. Let's get 5,000 likes for Grandma Justice." The ink flowed onto the page, dark and permanent, sealing the fate of Thistle Creek Ranch with a loop of cursive that Verna had perfected over 50 years of signing checks, contracts, and birthday cards. The room was so quiet she could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, counting down the seconds of her son's perceived victory. Hollis was practically vibrating beside her, his breath coming in shallow, greedy gasps. He watched the pen move, as if it were a magic wand, casting a spell that would turn his failures into gold. "There," Verna said quietly but powerfully. Lifting the pen, "It is done." Hollis didn't wait for the ink to dry. He snatched the document from under her hand, his eyes scanning the bottom of the page to ensure the signature was legible. Yes, that's it." He turned to Mercer, thrusting the paper toward him. "Wire the funds. Right now. I want the confirmation number before I walk out the door." Mercer took the document with a calm, practiced indifference. He pulled a notary stamp from his briefcase, the heavy thud of the ink pad echoing against the table. "Patience, Hollis. The wire is queued. I just need to scan the executed deed into our secure server to release the escrow." He opened his laptop, the screen glowing against his pale face. He placed the document on a portable scanner he had set up earlier. The machine whirred, feeding the paper through with a rhythmic zip, zip, zip. Hollis was pacing again, punching the air, grinning at the ceiling. 5 million, he muttered to himself, too low for Mercer to hear, but loud enough for Verna. "I'm free. I'm finally free of this dump." Verna sat still, her hands folded in her lap. She watched Mercer. She watched the arrogance on his face slowly curdle into confusion. The scanner finished. The image popped up on Mercer's screen. He reached for the mouse to click "Submit," but his hand froze. He frowned, leaning closer to the screen. He adjusted his glasses. The silence in the room shifted. The celebratory energy evaporated, replaced by a sudden, sharp static. "What is this?" Mercer asked, his voice cold. "What?" Hollis laughed, pouring himself a glass of whiskey from the sideboard without asking. "Don't tell me the Wi-Fi is down. Just push the button, Mercer." "This isn't the Omnivest deed," Mercer said, his tone dropping an octave. He picked up the physical paper, holding it up to the light as if looking for a watermark. He read the header aloud, his voice dripping with disbelief. "The Thistle Creek Irrevocable Land Trust." Hollis froze, the glass halfway to his mouth. "The what?" "This document," Mercer said, turning his gaze on Verna with the cold precision of a reptile spotting prey that fights back, "transfers the title of the property not to Omnivest Holdings, but to the Montana State Wildlife Conservation Fund." "That's impossible," Hollis stammered, splashing whiskey onto the floor as he rushed the table. "I saw her sign it. It was the paper you gave her." "It was on the stack," Mercer said, his eyes narrowing. He looked at Verna. "You switched them." "I did," Verna said calmly. She didn't flinch. She met Mercer's stare with a gaze that had weathered winters far colder than his corporate demeanor. What does that mean? Hollis screamed, grabbing the paper from Mercer's hand and staring at the dense legal text he couldn't understand. What is a land trust? Can we still sell it? Mercer, can we still build? Mercer closed his laptop with a snap. He began packing his things, his movements efficient and final. No, Hollis, we cannot build. An irrevocable conservation easement means the development rights have been extinguished. The land can never be subdivided. It can never be commercialized. It is now, legally speaking, a nature preserve. But the money. Hollis turned to Verna, his face turning a shade of purple that looked dangerous. What about the 2 million? What about my consulting fee? There is no money from Omnivest, Verna said, standing up. She felt 10 feet tall. Because Omnivest isn't buying anything. They have no use for a nature preserve. The deal is dead. You crazy old witch! Hollis lunged across the table, but Mercer caught his arm, not to help him, but to move him out of the way so he could retrieve his scanner. You ruined me! Hollis shrieked, spit flying from his mouth. You threw away $5 million. For what? For some deer and rabbits? You burned my inheritance. I saved my home, Verna said, her voice cutting through his hysteria like a whip. And I exposed you. I spoke to Elora, Hollis. I know about the side deal. I know about the Cayman accounts. I know you weren't trying to pay off a gambling debt to save your life. You were trying to sell my life to fund your retirement. Hollis went pale. The air went out of him. He looked at Mercer for support, but the fixer was already at the door, buttoning his coat. Mr. Mercer, Hollis pleaded, his voice cracking into a whine. Wait, we can fix this. We can sue her. She's senile. We can get a competency hearing. Mercer stopped, his hand on the doorknob. He looked at Hollis with pure contempt. A competency hearing takes months. My investors want land today. And frankly, Hollis, your mother seems sharper than you are. She outplayed you, and she certainly outplayed me. He looked at Verna and gave a curt, almost respectful nod. Good day, madam. The door slammed shut. The sound echoed through the farmhouse, sealing the silence. Hollis stood in the middle of the room, alone. The millions were gone. The luxury condo in the Caymans was gone. The lies were stripped away, leaving him naked and pathetic. He looked at his mother, his eyes wide with a new kind of terror. The terror of a man who has burned his bridges and finds himself on an island. Mom, he whispered, his voice trembling. What have you done? I have nothing. The tech investors, they'll sue me. I'll go to bankrupt court. I'll lose my car, my apartment. You should have thought of that before you tried to make me homeless, Verna said, without emotion. She walked to the sideboard and picked up a white envelope she had prepared days ago, just in case. She slid it across the table. Hollis looked at it. What is this? Open it, Verna commanded. He tore it open with shaking hands. A check fluttered out. He picked it up. $50,000. This is every cent I have in liquid savings, Verna said, her voice softening just a fraction, the mother in her peeking through the armor. It took me 10 years to save that. It was supposed to be for a new tractor. Now, it is for you. 50,000? Hollis scoffed, a flash of his old arrogance returning even in defeat. This won't cover a fraction of what I owe. I lost millions, Mom. It is enough for a bankruptcy lawyer, Verna said firmly. It is enough to rent a small apartment and buy a suit for job interviews. It is a fresh start, Hollis. It is more than you deserve. I can't live on this, he shouted, throwing the check down. I'm your son. You ceased to be my son the moment you decided my life was a commodity you could trade. Verna said quietly, but powerfully. She walked to the front door and held it open. The cold wind rushed in, cleansing the house of the stale smell of greed. "Get out." Hollis stared at her. He realized finally that the well was dry. There were no more tears to manipulate her with, no more threats to scare her with. She was immovable. He snatched the check from the table, stuffing it into his pocket like a thief. He walked past her without looking her in the eye, his shoulders slumped in defeat. He climbed into his rental car. Verna watched from the porch as he reversed, the tires spinning in the slush, and sped away down the long driveway. He didn't look back. Verna stayed on the porch until the taillights disappeared around the bend. The adrenaline that had sustained her began to fade, leaving her tired. Her bones ached. But the ranch was safe. The silence that settled over the valley wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out. A text from Elora. "Aunt Verna, did it work?" Verna typed back, "He is gone. The land is safe." 3 dots appeared as Elora typed again. "I found one more thing in Mercer's files while I was digging. I didn't want to tell you until you were safe." The person who originally tipped Mercer off about the ranch. The one who told him about Hollis's debts and suggested the acquisition strategy. Verna felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. Who? It was Arthur Penhaligon, Uncle Hank's old lawyer, the one who drew up the original will. Verna lowered the phone. She looked at the mountains, then back inside at the photo of her husband on the mantel. Arthur, Hank's best friend. The man who had sat at their dinner table every Sunday for 20 years. He had sold them out. He had seen a weak son and a valuable property, and he had made a call. The betrayal ran deeper than blood. It ran into the very foundation of her past. Verna turned back to the house. She wasn't done. Hollis was just a symptom. Arthur was the disease. She walked inside and closed the door, locking it tight. She went to the kitchen and put the kettle back on. She had a call to make. The war for Thistle Creek was over, but the reckoning was just beginning. Verna saved her home because she trusted her gut, not her fear. Many seniors are pressured into signing away their assets by family members who see them as nothing more than a bank account. Verna protected her legacy. If you believe elders deserve respect and protection, comment, "Respect your elders" below. And don't forget to subscribe, because Verna is about to pay a visit to a certain lawyer, and you won't want to miss what happens next.